Oh, hello. I was like, is this thing on? I'm Jen Yamato. It's my pleasure to bring on down a very special guest. Hold on. It's a little too quiet in here. Let's recap. Let's rewind. Round of applause for MaXXXine. She's a star. She's a real star. Joining us today, we have a very special guest. We are being broadcast into other Draft House theaters. Hello. Let me bring down writer, director, and editor Ty West. Oh, and special guest. And very special guest. And the most special guest.
She's the only cast member left in town besides me to do press, so we roped her in.
And introduce the lovely lady.
This is Molly. She's in all the movies. She has a couple. She's on Hollywood Boulevard, and then she does a lot of ADR work with her barks. So, but she's tired, but she's the emotional support animal for the remainder of press, right?
That's right. She said yes. So Ty, you have, first of all, congratulations. This has been such an undertaking. I know you have made 3 movies in 4 years.
Yeah, sounds about right. Yeah, it's been. I mean, I've been working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day since X on these movies. So I think it has been about 4.5 years. So it's very strange. I'm like at the very tail end of it, and I'm trying to figure out what that's going to be like in about 2 weeks when I don't have something to do.
So from X to Pearl to now MaXXXine, we see this full arc, this trilogy, which is a first for A24, by the way. Can't wait to hear about how easy that was to get greenlit. But from X to Pearl to MaXXXine, was this always the trajectory, the journey that you saw for this character, MaXXXine Minx?
No, I had written a movie called X, and that was basically it. I had written a movie, and I sent it to A24 and said, you know, do you think you'd be up for doing this? And they were like, I don't know. This is pretty out there. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. I was like, just think about it. And then credit to them, they called me back, and they were like, we thought about it. We actually really want to make it, and let's see what we can do. And that was very exciting, and then COVID happened. And that messed up everything. So we were trying to figure out how we would make the movie, and it needed to be shot in the summer. And we also need to be able to shoot it during COVID, which was very difficult. And so New Zealand became an option because we were never going to make it in time for America's summer, but that the Southern Hemisphere offered us summer and our winter. So we had a little more time to try to figure it out. And New Zealand didn't have COVID. And so we were fortunate enough to get work visas to be able to go down there and make a movie. And so that's what we did. But because it was in the middle of this crazy pandemic, and we were fortunate enough to be able to make a movie, and we were one of the only people like on Earth making a movie at the time, I just felt like it'd be crazy to go there, build Texas and New Zealand, and then just tear it down and go home and sit in our houses. It just felt like we were so fortunate to be there. How do we make as many movies as we can? And I couldn't think of an idea to use the farm in a sequel because everybody dies in X and there's nothing really to do there. But Mia was playing older Pearl, and we could go backwards. So we could take everything that we built and we could like resurrect it from being old and dilapidated into brand new, and we could make a prequel. And I sort of pitched them that idea, and then I also pitched them the idea of a third movie, that if these 2 movies work, we could make a third movie. And I jokingly was like, it could be X, XX, and then XXX, as sort of like how the X porn movie ratings got increasingly more ridiculous over the years. And so that was kind of like the plan, and they were intrigued by it, but I don't think they were totally seriously considering it. But I had to do 2 weeks of quarantine to get into New Zealand, and there's not a lot to do in a hotel room when you can't leave for 2 weeks, so I figured we'd try to write a script, and I asked Mia if she would stay longer, if we could pull it off, and she was excited about that idea, so we would FaceTime and figure out Pearl in those 2 weeks. And then we popped out in New Zealand, and I was able to show them that we had a production plan to do the movies back to back, and they liked the script, and somehow we made the 2 movies. And then it was a waiting game to see if people would like those 2 movies. Thankfully, you guys liked those 2 movies. And so that meant we made a 3rd movie, and now here we are.
Okay, you say that like it's so easy, like and then.
No, it was hard, very difficult the whole time. That's just this. We can't be here all night. That's the summary.
Okay, so at what point in that journey of yours, this creative journey, did you start working on MaXXXine? Did you start putting the pieces together of the setting, the story, even the locations, specific locations that you wanted in the film?
Well, I knew in the original idea I had before even writing Pearl, I knew it would be the 80s and I knew it would be Hollywood. Like I knew she would make it to Hollywood and it would be a very LA movie. But I didn't really start writing it seriously until the end of post-production on Pearl. So we went to South by Southwest and we premiered X, and then we released this trailer that we told everyone we had made another movie called Pearl. And Pearl was basically done at that point. We had to record the score and mix, and then we were done. And so then that gave me time from then to when Pearl came out in September to write MaXXXine so that we could make a teaser and announce the third movie at Toronto. And so as difficult as that was, it was actually good because it kind of motivated me. It gave me a deadline that I had to do. So I wrote it over that summer between X and Pearl coming out.
In 1985 is the year that you specifically landed on eventually. What was so perfect about that year and all the different forces converging that we see, especially in the beginning when you set it up? But why 1985? Well,
you know, it was going to be the 80s, and then you have to pick a date and you have to pick a time. And for the connective tissue of these movies, besides the through line of the character, was like cinema and how cinema affects people. And so it's certain kinds of cinema and certain kinds of filmmaking that the characters are doing that the movie is representing in X, and it's a different kind in Pearl. And then it would be a different kind in the third movie, and that was going to be, you know, something that was more reminiscent of the 80s and more reminiscent of like the boom of home video and things like that. But in 1985, there was a tremendous amount of like sort of moral outcry about like censorship and about lyrics in music leading to people killing each other and committing suicide, and horror movies being too violent, or movies being too violent in general, or people having access, kids having access to things they shouldn't have. And so there was this weirdly kind of like puritanical moment in the middle of the 80s in reaction to suddenly things like video nasties in England and things like that. And so that was interesting, and that was sort of like on brand with the thematics of the trilogy. And also in the summer of 1985, there was like there was a serial killer. And so all of that led for a very like rich tapestry of a backdrop for a story like this. Because, you know, if I had made it the year before, the backdrop would have been the Olympics, and that's less appropriate. So
if you made it the year before, you wouldn't have St. Elmo's Fire, which came out in 1985.
So you knew the answer. You knew the answer of why we said it then.
That needle drop, just to zero in on it, it's so funny. It lands in, you know, like to have the contrast between the upbeatness of St. Elmo's Fire with Mia, what do you call it? Key fisting Kevin Bacon. Was that like a stroke of genius that just occurred to you one day, this song? Were you looking for something that would strike that balance?
Weirdly enough, that one came about in a strange way. So we had gotten St. Elmo's Fire to be the movie on Hollywood Boulevard, so that is on the Vine Theater marquee. And we would mention Demi Moore in a previous scene. So it was sort of part of the vibe of the movie. I just thought we'd never be able to afford that song. It never even occurred to me to put that song in there. And when I was editing, I had a couple songs in mind, and none of them were working. Like, none of them felt right. And then I just was like, well, we already put St. Elmo's Fire in the movie. It would be the #1 song. And I remember asking my assistant, I was like, he's a young, great guy, and I was like, you don't know who Casey Kasem is, but can you go see if you can find the radio check for when that was the #1 song, which would have been when the movie came out. And that kind of added to the backdrop of the movie being consistent. And we found that, and as soon as we found the Casey Kasem thing, I was like, well, let's try St. Elmo's Fire and keep it all related. And then it worked so well, and then I was like so nervous about how much is this gonna cost. And then the weirdest thing happened where the original this is a deep dive here, but the original St. Elmo's Fire track is like kind of stuck in litigation, which tends to happen. So John Parr had like re-records, and it's always great when they have re-records because you can negotiate with the artist. And so here we are with St. Elmo's Fire.
The anniversary version.
Yes, exactly.
I want to ask you to talk about your collaboration now over 3 films with Mia Goth. She's fantastic across all 3 of these films, playing 2 characters, different timelines, and where we see her end up in MaXXXine is so satisfying. What's satisfying to you about being able to bring that character full circle to where we see her in MaXXXine at the conclusion of her story?
You know, that's a little bit of one of these questions that's a very rear view mirror question, which is tough because I'm sort of still in it. But, you know, when I wrote X, and the plan for X was to make a sort of somewhat lowbrow concept of a movie and try to do something highbrow with craft. So to try to bring a certain level of performance or performances from the same actor, special effects makeup, cinematography, music, to really put the craft of filmmaking on display, and to make a movie about people making a movie, to make you think about the way they're making a movie, so you might think about the way I'm making the movie, and that in a way it becomes this sort of celebration of like the craft of filmmaking that I kind of slipped in on you that you didn't know was coming. And so that was the original idea, and then it's quite a thing to play two characters in a movie. And when I first met Mia, she had no idea that that was the plan. So we were talking about the movie as if she was just going to be MaXXXine, and then I said, hey, I have this idea. What if you played both parts? And she just sort of stopped, and I could see the wheels turning, and then she was like, I could kill that. And I just totally believed her. And that sort of fearlessness, and that sort of, she had almost like a chip on her shoulder attitude about like, I'm ready to do this. I'm ready to do something bold like this. And then when the idea of Pearl came around, it became an evolution of the craft of performance and things like that, because she was able to do another type of performance related to the previous one and sort of evolve it. And that was very enriching, and that was very cool, and she's tremendous in that movie. And so when we went to make this movie, the whole goal was to see MaXXXine, who is the same character as the previous movie, but in the same way old Pearl and young Pearl are very different performances because of different times in her life. It was an opportunity for, I think, Mia to get to do that again, and to see a character that we know, but to see her at a different place and a different time, and to see an evolution of that. And so I think just between the three movies, by the nature of them happening, it's become this like really amazing showcase for like all that she's capable of, and obviously like it's really resonated with people in a very cool way, and to the point that people like dress up like her for Halloween and stuff now. And so it's very surreal, and it's very flattering, and you know, I'm like proud to have something to do with that. But really, it's like it was like her time to be able to like show up, and she did.
And people are gonna have even more costumes to wear this Halloween. You're going to see so many MaXXXines, I think.
I'm looking forward to because you know, there was a lot of Pearl in the projectionist couples costumes. I'm looking forward to MaXXXine and Buster Keaton. I think those are a good couples costume this Halloween.
The look of MaXXXine, the production design, the costumes, the makeup, the hair, everything is so good. It seems like a really tricky thing to depict the 80s from where we stand now, without, you know, veering into cheesy 80s, campy 80s. But you had some specific, like, cinematic touchstones from the 80s that you and your crew were thinking of. Some of them that I understand are Brian De Palma films, Hardcore, Debbie Harry, Repo Man. Can you talk a little bit about the trick of walking that line when you're depicting a time like this and getting the look and the vibe and the feel just right?
Well, I mean, one thing when you're why I like making period piece movies is, you know, if you make a movie that takes place today, you could just go outside this theater and you could shoot it there because the location looks like today and you're ready to go. And someone could be on their phone and you could do a scene and it could be great, and that's fine. If you want to shoot something that takes place in the 80s, everything outside has to change. And if everything outside has to change, then you have to decide what you're changing it to. So then you have no choice but to like add this very intense creative dimension to making the movie, where, okay, well, we need to pick a location that was there in the 80s, and then we need to make it look 80s, and we need to populate it with people who look 80s. So every piece of clothing, every prop, every sign, every product, like everything has to go through a conversation creatively where you decide which color, which thing. And so that's really fun, and that to me is like aesthetically enriching, and that's something that having a hand on every aspect of the movie is why I like doing it. You know, I think it's not just about sort of going out in real life and capturing it, it's about like creating it. And so when you do that though, you also have to be cautious that you're not making like kind of, as you're saying, a pastiche like all by itself. And one way to avoid that is to try to make it as lived in as possible. And you know, like if it's 1985 and you go to your grandparents' house, they do not have furniture from 1985. They have furniture from 1960. And so one way is just to kind of be aware that you don't populate the movie with everything that's popular in the moment the movie takes place, so that it feels more genuine. Because if it feels believable and it feels authentic, then the audience kind of stops noticing it, and they're in with the characters, and then they can go along the ride for the movie. And then there's fun flourishes of nostalgia and things like that they can sort of enjoy along the way. But first and foremost, you have to make it like believable. And I think that goes to also how you photograph it. If you photograph it in a very modern way, with like very modern techniques and things like that, it will also kind of rub up against another, because you're just not used to seeing that. When you think of that era, you're not used to seeing a camera moving a certain way or lights being a certain way and things like that. So to try to be conscious of all that, to really create a time and place is appealing to me, and it's appealing to watch for me. So I'm always after doing that. And as far as like the movies you're talking about, you know, I don't know that there was as many direct references as people always think that there are, but movies of the era that are very rich in style, or very rich in their aesthetics, or in a time and place. You know, like Hollywood Boulevard in the 80s is a very particular kind of sleazy, it's something that it's not now. And you could find some documentaries with that, or you could find certain movies like Angel or Vice Squad or something like that, and we don't necessarily sit down and say, oh, we're going to make something like that, but it is the time capsule to see what it looks like, to know, you know, oh, you know what, there weren't DeLoreans driving around all the time like people would think. You know, it's like, it's the Pintos from 1970s and things like that. And it's a good way to kind of refresh certainly the crew of the of what the time and place was like.
So you go from shooting X and Pearl back to back in New Zealand, set in this isolated farmhouse, to really seriously expanding the scope of this world and the storytelling and production in MaXXXine. What kind of, you know, panics did you send your producers into when you delivered the script and they read very specific, very iconic locations like the Universal Backlot, the Psycho House, Hollywood Forever? Yeah, it was, I mean, I think people's expectations were that it was going to be bigger. And then I think the script came in, and the thing is, everybody was very happy with the script. So there wasn't this sort of reaction of, oh no, we have to change something. It was more just like, how can we do it? And really what that meant was, how can we be in all these places, and how can we be so efficient? Like, for instance, if you're looking at a scene in the movie at any of those locations you mentioned, and they are dressed to be 80s, and hopefully they are impressive in some capacity to you, 6 inches outside of the frame, it is the most 2023 it could possibly be. You know what I mean? So it was like, it was very meticulously planned that, look, this is the area that we can do, because we can't afford to do beyond that. And that's kind of how I approach the movie, is in a very like specific, we're seeing from here to here, and I will never change my mind. It's just from here to here. But between these two like goalposts, it has to be like perfect. But outside of that, I don't care what's happening. And so that was the thing. It just kind of made it a little bit more manageable, because it gave people in the crew like something specific to focus on, rather than feeling like you have to turn all of Hollywood into something else. It was more like, you just have to get from this doorway to that doorway, and that's a challenge into itself. But that was the way to deal with the scope of the movie in somewhat of a responsible financial way. There's a scene involving what, I don't know how many people out there know this word, funicular. A funicular that she takes up to the house, the party house in the hills. That is something that you don't see every day in LA. What inspired like little touches like that are, you know, not something that might be so obvious, but what inspired that one?
When I first moved to LA, I went to a Halloween party at a super wealthy guy's house, and I went to the party, and I checked in, and I was the house was very nice, and there was like hardly anybody there, and it was the lamest party of all time. And it was like so disappointing because like I don't want to say who it was, but it was somebody that I was like, this should be a really good party. And it was very unimpressive. And then as I was getting ready to leave, I ran into someone and they were like, no, the party's at the other house. And so they sent me down this like it was like sort of up in the hills, and they sent me down this staircase, and you can see all of LA, and it's really beautiful, and no one's there. And then you turn a corner, and there's this funicular. And you get in the funicular and you ride down the funicular to the other house because the house is on such a steep hill. There's two houses that are connected by this. And I rode down there, and then it was an awesome party. And there was a circus, like it was crazy. That was like one of my early LA stories. I had not lived in LA very long, and like I went to a house in the hills and rode one of those down to like a crazy party. And so that always stuck with me. And then, you know, also in LA, it's just because it's in the hills, historically there were a lot of those, you know, and there's a famous house like the Chemisphere that had one and things like that. And I don't know how many are left in LA. We had to build this one, and it was a project. But yeah, it always stuck with me from that weird Halloween party.
Oh, it's just one of my favorite touches in this film. You know, living in LA, like those of us in this room know, living in LA can be really self-reflexively ridiculous at times, and setting a movie within a movie in the industry really allows you to play so much with that. I'm thinking of what MaXXXine uses to cut her cocaine with. Thinking of, you know, even the fact that, did you got everybody out there recognize the star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame that she puts her cigarette butt out on? The idea that Theda Bara's star is actually in real life, like if we go outside right now, if we go to Hollywood right now, which I may not recommend going out right now, but Theda Bara's star is really right next to the Vine Theater and the Deja Vu Showgirls strip club.
That was very good fortune to us because our footprint was very small in Hollywood for as difficult as that was, and it was in the script that she was going to do that. And I was like, okay, we're going to have to send like some other, like a camera somewhere to go find her star. And it was like 10 feet from where we were shooting. It was like the one miracle that happened. But yeah, that was always in there because in Pearl, well, she's sort of one of the original, like, I guess, sex symbols, if you will, from the silent film era, who's sort of like, I think, less thought of now than should be. But also in Pearl, I included on the marquee the Cleopatra movie that she's in, and then the name of the alligator is named after her because Pearl names everything after her favorite movie stars. And so it's kind of a way, there's an unbelievable of like, what do they call it, like Easter eggs in this movie that are referencing things in the other movie. And they're relatively subtle like that. I mean, that one's not that subtle, but they're, that was kind of the interesting thing about writing the third movie and having created a world, or like a universe, as people like to say now. It was, I just decided to lean into it and to try to like historically track these things through the world of these three movies.
Lastly, we're just about out of time, but lastly, I want to ask you about this quote that you open MaXXXine with, this Betty Davis quote. In this business, until you're known as a monster, you're not a star. It is such a good lead-in to MaXXXine's, final chapter. But what was the stroke of brain sparkles that led you to that quote for this?
This is a tricky one to end on also because it's like I don't have a great answer for it because I think to overtalk why I picked it is kind of takes some of the, magic away from it. But it's something I've always been aware of, and I think it sort of represents the feeling, the strange feeling of the movie business. And I think it was like representative of how to kick this movie off and where she's at, MaXXXine is at, and where she's about to be at, and what it takes to achieve something that's so unlikely to achieve, and whether that quote is, I can't speak for what she actually meant when she said that, and also it's such an interesting quote that I think can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, and so it just felt very representative of the beginning. I have my own reasons about it, but to just generally say it felt representative of the movie that was going to follow, and then to kind of bookend it with the Betty Davis High song felt like a way to really find a full circle conclusion to the story. But it's a really fascinating and like poignant quote, I think. And so that was the way to kick off a Hollywood story, in my opinion.
Oh, you think it's true? You're saying it's true? I'm kidding.
You can tell me, yeah.
Oh, well, thank you, everybody, for joining us for this Q&A with Ty West.
Thank you guys for coming out.
X, Pearl, and MaXXXine, congrats.
Thank you. You guys are kind of like the first regular audience. I mean, we had one secret screening and then we had a premiere, but this is kind of the first like fans of the movie public screening. And so this is very cool, and thank you guys for showing up and filling these theaters and making us feel like we made these movies for a good reason, because it's been very sort of humbling to see all of the appreciation for them, and Mia and I and everybody else have worked very hard, and we're very grateful for all of it, and we hope you like the movie tonight, and we hope you tell your friends to go see it, and hopefully everybody has a really good time at the movies. Thanks.
Thank you.